leader in cyber. We're very appreciative. Please make your way back to stage 1 as I hand off to Susanne and our experts today. Welcome, Susanne.
Thanks very much, Sonia. I am so delighted. Well, first of all, super inspired by the last presentation. And I think you'll find this topic of cybersecurity equally inspiring. It's a large topic, and it certainly is one that we need to address if we are going to commercialize and bring autonomy into the mainstream. These are topics that are extremely important. So I am really delighted to have an incredible panel to introduce to you today. And I just want to put a little bit of context around, why we're talking about cybersecurity and what makes it so important. So certainly vehicles today are intuitive systems. They're driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning. They're connected to wireless networks, apps, electronic components, sensors, and actuators. The risk that malicious actors could penetrate these vehicle networks puts the automotive industry in a position where end-to-end security is absolutely a must. A connected vehicle requires enormous processing power and several communication channels for the electronic components and compute to communicate. Vehicles today are truly defined by their software and much connectivity, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to everything. And vehicles must be secure by design. We know that the modern vehicle contains hundreds of electronic components, and those components are driven by millions of lines of code. And quite often, these components come from many, many different sources. So cybersecurity is really about that risk mitigation and understanding the threats and mitigating those threats in our networks and in the devices. You cannot protect what you cannot see. And so it's vital to know what's connected to our networks and to our devices. And the increase in supply chain attacks makes the cybersecurity threat a clear and present danger. I don't want to be too dramatic about that, but truly, we don't ask the question if, we always ask the question when it comes to cybersecurity. So I am really delighted to introduce to you our panel of experts. I think that you're going to gain so much from the insights that you will learn from this incredible group. So what I'll do is I will introduce who's on the panel, and then I'll go to each panelist to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about the work that they do. We have with us Christine Gadsby, the Vice President of Product Security at BlackBerry. We have Bob Martin, the Senior Principal Engineer at MITRE Corporation and the Chair of the Steering Committee of the Industrial Internet Consortium. We have Admiral Robert Day, who's the President of BlackBerry Government Solutions. And we have Chandana Munireddy, the Senior Principal of Cybersecurity Systems at Aptiv. I think you'll all agree this is an incredibly inspirational panel. So I'll go to you first, Christine, to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Christine Gadsby. I'm the Vice President of Product Security at BlackBerry, and my organization's main function is to ensure that our 76 or so different product SKUs in market remain secure in market as a software supplier, and to ensure that we can operationalize security from a go-to-market strategy as far as our products go.
Wonderful, thank you. Bob?
Hi, I'm Bob Martin from MITRE Corporation. I work in security of both software and enterprises from a risk management point of view, and do a lot with industry and government in trying to bring standards and norms of practices in the whole area.
Wonderful, thank you. Admiral Day?
Hi. Good morning. Bob Day is President of BlackBerry Government Solutions. I provide what's called FedRAMP cloud services for 3 products for BlackBerry. Again, high standards from a cybersecurity standpoint, particularly from a compliance standpoint. So it's a challenge as governments continue to ramp up all the standards that we're required to meet to sell our software.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Chandana?
Hi, everyone. This is Chandana Munireddy from Aptiv. So I'm a cybersecurity engineer at Aptiv core cybersecurity team. So my day-to-day task is to make sure that we have security in all the Aptiv products that goes out of Aptiv to the customer or to any other manufacturers that we have. So we make sure that we are secure enough in the embedded world. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So we'll go right into our questions, and I'll send a question to each one of you, and I'm really looking forward to you providing your guidance and your insight to our audience today. So Bob, this one is for you. In your work at MITRE Corporation and leading various committees that are developing standards and addressing the big issues that are associated with software-based technology systems, can you walk us through from your perspective what the big issues are that are facing the automotive software industry today?
I think it comes from three things. You've already mentioned a little bit of them. One is the fact that automotives themselves have more and more software. Each of the different components have software in them, and they network together in the vehicle. The second is that those systems reach outside the vehicle and they interact with other people's software and capabilities. And so there's risks from that software. And the third that sometimes gets overlooked is the tools that are actually used to create the vehicle, the design tools, the test tools, the manufacturing tools. All of those are driven by software and data, and therefore they basically can be corrupted or less than optimal quality or actually attacked. And so each of these kinds of software in the past, you would have, kind of built them from the ground up if you were starting 15 years ago. But today you assemble them. So they each have a supply chain. And the trouble is that unlike physical items, we don't have a good way of capturing the quality and checks that have been done on software. So you need to get a handle on what are the components, what has been done to make sure they're up to the job that they're going to be asked for, and how can you have confidence about that?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah, there's no doubt the complexity it's immense. And with all of the various components growing and the sources of those components being, in some cases, unknown, we've got a lot of things to think about. So Christine, BlackBerry is truly a gold standard in the industry, helping clients to secure their supply chains, especially in the automotive space where there are hundreds of components, as we've talked about. Can you share some of the tools and the strategies that can help address some of this complexity?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I think, first of all, the main thing, especially for this audience and group who may be listening, is really to kind of, take a big step back and identify what you're dealing with in the supply chain. So I think sometimes we confuse the role of a software producer, meaning, you're actively producing software and you're putting it into somebody else's supply chain, or a consumer. Are you consuming other vendor software and bringing it into your supply chain? While some of those security controls might look and kind of feel the same way, the responsibility of who's asking what and who's doing what is different in those two instances. Also know that you do have a responsibility as a software supplier. So even if you just bring it back and say, okay, I'm making a widget, I'm putting a widget into a tier 1, tier 2, whatever solution, I'm selling it and someone else is going to make something, you do have a responsibility as a supplier to do basic kind of, security hygiene. I think there's a lot of information right now swirling around between, the Cybersecurity Executive Order and the NIST Software Development Framework and CMMC and all of these different things, and it can get very confusing. It's very scary. But I'll tell you from the depths of how we are looking at this as a multi-software vendor, meaning I have, hundreds of SKUs of products in market that I have to watch, we take it back to the basics. And so this is, my advice for you is this: realize that security hygiene, really those things all boil down to some basic best practices. If you make an effort to set your own security hygiene kind of baseline, it will really allow you to sort of turn those knobs and adjust small things as the industry regulates itself. Software development in the past has been kind of, everybody knows this, I'm not telling you any secrets, but it's been really the Wild West. And what we're seeing with the cybersecurity executive order and in the work that you see the US government trying to do to sort of rein in those controls is they're really just acknowledging what we've all really known for a long time. Again, I'm not telling anybody secrets here, but that we need a baseline, right? We need to be held to some standards, because when we sell our software and we give it to others, we put it into their supply chain, and therefore we need to be held accountable. So that can start at the very beginning. It doesn't need to be something that is overthought. Really just look at, how are you baking into your security design best practices? Are you doing threat modeling? Are you looking at the end results when you make your software? Are you building a systems inventory? Do you know how much open source is in your software? Open source is not bad, but you need to know, how much is in your software. You need to be able to track it. Are you looking at the different categories of testing that you could be doing, right? That doesn't necessarily need to cost a ton. There's free open source, options to do something like this, but are you looking at the difference between testing in, different environments and sandboxed and, before you release and in production? And, are you looking at SaaS testing and DAS testing and, code at rest versus code that's not, things like that? Are you really looking at creating a strategy to test that software before you even think about putting it into the supply chain that is public? And then again, you have to decide what you're going to do with that output, right? So decide what you're going to do once you have that testing framework done, and what's your threshold going to be? How are you going to patch vulnerabilities? How are you going to make sure that you have, you can get vulnerabilities into, vulnerability fixes back into your product? This is a really common one I see with a lot of people in the industry, is that they think that, we're going to, engineer this software fix and then we're going to walk away, and that it can't be farther from the truth. If you don't have a vehicle to get that fix out, if you don't have a software release or a maintenance release or a way to get that to your customers, you haven't fixed anything. And so that's really, the supply chain accountability that we're looking for. What are you doing with your vulnerabilities? All software is vulnerable. It just is. So how are, and the maturity comes in your program, and how are you looking at, how are you dealing with that? That is what I call is kind of the key to having a plan and having a maturity level. And then the last thing I'll leave you with on this topic is just to look at what you're shipping. So every software release is really an opportunity to either increase or reduce attack surface. You're doing one of the two. Every single time you update a product, every single time you ship out, any kind of those updates where we click, download, you are literally, in that supply chain, making that supply chain, who all of those consumers downstream, you're either making it, a safer place or not safer place. And so you should be looking at, how do you look at, that maturity model of the software you release. We have a very robust program where we look at the, should we ship it calculator. We are a part of that release cycle, and we go to the table toe to toe with our product teams, and we look at that, how we are doing it as far as fixing our vulnerabilities. And so it is very much a part of that life cycle.
That is a lot to think about. Thank you very much for that. That was very thorough, and I think you gave everyone a really good sense of just sort of the end-to-end thought process that you need to be going through to set your baselines and to all the various things that you need to think about. So thank you so much for that. So Admiral Day, in your experience as a CIO, former CIO for the U.S. Coast Guard, and managing certification and compliance processes at BlackBerry in your current role, you see things obviously from a very operational perspective. Can you talk to us about how operating environments are changing with the proliferation of endpoints, in Internet of Things, and how do you secure those endpoints?
Well, it gets very scary is what happens. You take all those things that Christine is saying and say, I'm hoping that my suppliers are doing exactly those processes, because what we're experiencing is just a massive expansion of endpoints. And just look what happened during COVID and work from home. So now I've got 10,000 people working from home on devices that I have not necessarily secured from a corporate standpoint, working all sorts of different things. And add to that, all the other things that are being connected. Just in that house alone, from fridges all the way to the latest Xbox, all connected to the same network that now is connecting to my corporate network. And how am I going to control all of this? And it's just the explosive, growth of the number of endpoints. Now apply that to automobiles as my kids come home with their Tesla and it connects to my network here at the house. It's just, it just massively expands your area of responsibility. And how do you do this? And some of the key things is one, you have to know exactly what is connecting, and having to have full visibility of all the devices that are accessing your network one way or the other, or interconnected in. And just that inventory alone, becomes massive as we start rolling out 5G and all these other connections there. And then it becomes beyond that, just not knowing what's connecting, is what are they connecting to and who is actually behind it, getting into that real access control and managing that, not only just from who's accessing the network, but what are they accessing in the network. So it starts at the endpoint knowing what it is, how secure the environment is on that endpoint, and then securing that environment either using containers or other mechanisms in clients such that that device itself is not a threat to you. And then further going back in is when they are accessing, what are they accessing? And getting into multi-factor authentication is a minimum just to get into the network. And then beyond that, one has to consider what are they accessing in the network. Now this gets into the wonderful joy of trying to inventory everything that you have from a data standpoint, and then categorizing who and what can access that data. And you're going to have to apply the same things to an automobile, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. Are you going to allow the dealer to have full access to every single component in that automobile? Who's going to do that? Who's going to do the vulnerability scanning on that automobile? When is it going to be done? How's it going to be done? Because you're going to need to be able to scan across the entire device to say, where are those vulnerabilities? Because we know, as Christine said, every single piece of software is coming in there has a weakness, and over time, the OEMs are going to have to update that and make sure that they are meeting the various different things. And it comes to the same thing, is where are you getting the visibility of the threat that's coming into you? And now you're looking at the auto ISAC. Are they distributing? Is everybody participating? Is everybody sharing their vulnerabilities such that we know what the threat vectors are, scanning for those threat vectors, and moving on from there? And how are you going to do it in a connected or disconnected state? When's it going to happen? We're not going to want to reboot the car while it's doing 60 miles an hour down the highway. And what time is that vulnerability scan going to be done? And when's it going to reboot? We certainly don't want what happens with Microsoft and other operating systems now with a forced reboot. I just lost 10 minutes of work, or I just dropped off of this video conference. So there's so many factors that one has to think about from an operational standpoint that keeps CIOs and CISOs up at night, because again, we've expanded the threat surface, and the number of threats that are coming at us is just expanding day in and day out. And we could talk all day about, but the key thing is from an operational standpoint, the complexity of what we're dealing with because of the expanded number of endpoints and the expanded connectivity, one really has to think this through all the way.
Absolutely right. And it implies a great deal of trust when you think about it. As you were saying, allowing for over-the-air updates of your vehicle operating systems and, maintenance and things like that. There's a lot of trust that needs to be built along that entire communication chain. So there are definitely a lot of things to think about. Certainly, you've given us a lot of good points to mull over. So Chandana, this one's for you. And so certainly drawing from your work at Aptiv, can you talk to us a little bit about your secure development life cycle and how you build security in, like all the way from concept to production and post-production?
That's a very good question, Susan. Thank you for the question. So that's pretty much all the work, most part of the work that we do at Aptiv. So say, for example, once we receive, a customer requesting that we need security in this product. right? Maybe it can be a new product that they're coming up with, where Aptiv is responsible for manufacturing it, or it can be just like a change request, to an existing product that, we just have to increase security to this product. So once they come to us, irrespective of the customer have the security requirements or no, Haptiv has developed some of its core security requirements that I can say, where we make sure that irrespective of customer requirements, we put in these requirements. We make sure that Aptiv's product is at least minimal secure enough, even if the customer is wanting it or no. So starting from that phase where we get the requirements from the customer and we analyze those requirements, I would say beginning from the start center, then we analyze the requirements with the product teams and we make sure that we come up with whether is it feasible for this product or no, or is it too much of security, that it's bringing down other functionalities in the product. And then we make sure that we discuss with customer on a weekly basis or daily basis, depending on the need for security in that product. Then we determine the cybersecurity relevance for that product. Do we have high cybersecurity needs for this product based on a couple of factors? Say, for example, is it is this module that we are developing or this product that we are developing, is it contributing to something like a safety of the car, or is it communicating with external world? So there are so many factors like this that we capture. So based on those factors, we make sure what is the cyber relevancy to this product. And we say either it's high, medium, or low. Based on that, we move forward with the requirements. So we go back and forth with the customers saying that we need security for this. We need to have this within this time period at this level. So that would be the initial phase where we deal with customers. And then once we have, so pretty much most of the automotive company follow we model right now for the development life cycle. So from the requirements elicitation phase to the ITV testing, so security is pretty much involved in all these phases of the development life cycle. So once we do all this requirements elicitation internally and with customers, so we make sure that okay, we conclude that these are our system requirements. Then from there we develop the software requirements and we make sure all the security that we want are in place. We bring up with the architectural diagrams to show visually that this is where the security is, or these are the modules that we include for the security. So and then once the security is in place in the software, once the software engineers take care of that, then we go to the testing. So be it unit testing or the ITV testing, we make sure that we run some vulnerability tools like Admiral and others were saying from BlackBerry. Other panelists were saying that there are a lot of vulnerabilities that we see. So there are a lot of, as Christine was mentioning, there are a lot of open source code that we use or tools that we use. So we make sure that we run a couple of tools to capture all these vulnerabilities, and we make sure that we don't leave anything behind. So prior to this, we do something called a threat assessment or a threat analysis and the risk assessment document named as TARA. So it can be called with various names with different companies. So we do this document, or we prepare this document based on the product, which pretty much shows us all the risk involved within the product and what are the mitigations that we want to have. Do we want to have security in pretty much every communication that we have, or do we just want to focus it on some critical messages and the rest of the communication should be still fine? So based on the risk that we have, we try to come up with the mitigations, and those mitigation will be converted into the requirements that we have for the product. So beginning from the requirements phase to the testing and even post-production. So so we have security involved. Post-production, again, we continuously monitor for some incidents or vulnerabilities. Say, for example, we are using Bluetooth in our car. We continuously monitor, for Bluetooth, any incidents that occur with respect to Bluetooth or any vulnerabilities that we come across. Then we inform the customer that, this is what we have. This is the vulnerability that we found with respect to Bluetooth. And this is, I guess, this is the fix that we need to do. Should we do it or no? Then we again, connect with the customer and make sure that a security patch is fixed, and then safely to the customers. Yeah.
Awesome. That's certainly very comprehensive, and you made a really good point in your discussion there in terms of determining, as you're applying the various security elements to your product, does that affect latency? Does that affect performance? So there's some other considerations that kind of come into all of that. So that brings me, Christine, to a question for you. Quite often the developers and the folks that are sort of concerned about the security aspect of things are, serving two masters and the need to put products out, to update products. How do you reconcile those two functions within your organization and on your team?
That's such a great question. And that's a hot topic in every company. And again, the one thing that I can't stress enough is to really understand what master you are serving, right? If you are a software producer and you are making software and you are selling it into other supply chains, you have a set of responsibilities. And if you are consuming software from other parts of the supply chain, you need to hold your vendors accountable. Also, I want to introduce a third paradigm, because this is where I see companies, that I talk to try and help them unravel this. IT security certifications are not software supply chain regulation. So there is a huge difference in milestones between looking at things that have to do with IT and then looking at your software supply chain, right? This is why, again, the industry is working so fast and so hard to regulate itself, is because there's been this lack of thought through this. So when you're talking about how you generate revenue, you got to ask yourself two things. One, how do you protect the revenue that you have coming in? So what do you have in market that you've purchased? And again, put the two hats on. Are you consuming or are you producing? If you're producing, ask yourself those questions on how you're guaranteeing that revenue. Are you looking at the cross, security things that you're doing as baselines to really protect that revenue stream, right? To make sure that you're actually doing the work. And I know that there are companies that are not, and again, start somewhere. When we speak on this publicly, we say this a lot. Just start somewhere. Make a plan. Write some things down. Use third parties. Go look at some open source tools. There's things you can be doing, like doing a bug bounty or something like that. If you can't do the work, have someone come in to help you do the work until you learn how to do the work. And that's a really good area to focus. The opposite end, if you're in the supply chain and you currently have revenue you're generating, are you holding your vendors accountable? What's in your legal contract agreements? What are you asking your suppliers of? Are you asking them how they're patching their vulnerabilities? Are you asking them how that they're guaranteeing your spot in the supply chain? Are you asking them to ensure that they protect you generating revenue? So it's a lot, but make sure that those conversations are at the table. And I can guarantee, and I'll end with this on here. If you're planning far enough left in your development or your consumer cycle of software, the revenue will be protected and be generated. If you wait until it's in market to think about it, you've procured and it's already running in your environment, that is too late for you to be thinking about, security controls to put in the supply chain. It's just too late. So, if you're not doing it now, just make a plan, walk away today and make a plan to, shift left and think left, because that's where it's the best, the cheapest, the fastest. You'll get the most bang for your buck, and it's where you're going to get the consistency in your baseline. My advice.
And the contractual sort of relationship that you have with your suppliers, that's an important aspect as well. And certainly from a legal perspective, that's another area that's opening up, is what do these new contracts look like? What are the types of things that you need to include in the contracts in order to protect everyone and to create that visibility that you've thought of these things and you've addressed them, and your suppliers have thought of these things and addressed them. So, those are some really awesome points. And again, to your point, once something is in market, isn't really the time to think about it, because that impacts the trust that you as an organization have. And we can afford only so many blips, if you will, on that side of the equation before you lose that trust. And certainly whenever we're talking about cybersecurity, trust is an enormous element that underpins all of this. So thank you very much for that. Bob, this one is for you. So in our work, and I think we've heard through all of the discussions here today, in our work at Invest Ottawa and Area X.O, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, small businesses that are really coming up, and developing new technologies, but their resources are limited on people, on money, and where they invest those resources is really important. Can you give any guidance in terms of where would a smaller organization start in terms of building their software bill of materials? What types of things should they focus on? What's first? Just your guidance would be really helpful here.
Well, first, I think a concept we hadn't really talked too much about, we kind of implied, we never mentioned that a software bill of materials is the key to this, and the machine processing of software bills of material. So I think a lot of what we've talked about is going to be very intimidating. People are thinking that they're doing manually and they have to move things around and do it in meetings and such, but really, with a software bill of materials generated by the development tools your team uses and by those who produce software for you, the whole code management system enabled by a standardized software bill of material is the key. Because once you can identify what software is moving and what is it you're talking about, then you can attach other information to that about what testing was done, what tools were run against it, how was it built, what configuration, was it done using secure memory approaches and others. So the key of what we've been talking about is not to do it the way we did it a dozen years ago, not even the way we do it 5 years ago, but rather tie together the tooling, the whole idea of DevSecOps, whether you do it continuously or not, but do it as a flow, do it as a connected set of tools that bring the elements together, understand that it hasn't been altered, so there's integrity, but there's also identity, where it came from, who's accountable for it, and information about it, about how it was built, what kinds of tools ran against it. Was it statically, dynamically tested? Was it regression tested? If your contract says it needs to be tested against ISO 5055, which is a security and quality standard, well, what tool did that? And do I have the results? And can I convey that? So automation. So when you start putting together your team to build your software aspects, don't let them go out and get the newest, coolest, greatest thing that they've thought about. Get tools that support your need for trust and assurance and integrity, and have them learn how to use them, because this is a core business capability that you just can't have. Oh, we're going to use this language because Johnny, he's the hottest guy in this area, and that's a tool he likes. That's a recipe for disaster.
Actually, that's really good information because a lot of folks do go for the coolest, newest way to do things. And so, your message, don't make it hard on yourself. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Utilize the right tools from the very beginning that really help you to put all of this in place. So thank you for that. That was really awesome. So Admiral Day, we've been talking a lot about trust, as we've been, having this conversation, and certainly the concept of zero trust is almost a buzzword in the industry. I wonder if you could, weigh in a little bit on what it really means from an operational perspective to software developers and consumers. Like, could you just demystify it for us a little bit?
Well, it is the buzzword of the day, and it's getting slapped on products of every single kind, that it is the zero trust solution. But when you get down to the basics of it, just Go to NIST 800-207. It gives you the basic elements of what zero trust really means. And the bottom line is know all devices, know all identities, be able to assign accesses and privileges to those identities that are using those devices. Add to it, know all threats. And then take and mix all that together. And how do you take and manage that? You're going to have, you can't do it with humans these days anymore. You have to use artificial intelligence and machine learning and stitch this all together. Because again, we go back to some of our previous discussion, exploding endpoints, exploding IoT devices connecting to your network. It is beyond human comprehension. And one really needs to architect their way in using artificial intelligence, machine learning, to be able to understand fully what's going on in the environment. And that's really what it is understanding and controlling those different environments, and particularly the data that exists inside of those environments. So it's just beyond, logical access. It's also, what the data is, who has access to it, in the whole 9 yards. And so it really becomes that piece where you're saying you are architecting trust across the entire environment, both from a physical standpoint and a logical and data standpoint, as to knowing who has access to what and what data should be going where, and then looking for those abnormalities where it is violated. Because again, you're going to have to use artificial intelligence and other tools to be able to recognize when that does not look right. And then there has to be the whole team behind it that in a security operations center and just general IT operations that is alerted instantaneously when that occurs, such that you can either investigate quickly and shut down inappropriate accesses or behavior that is not normal. And so it really gets into a fully integrated architecture. We kind of talked about that with Endpoint. And it ties right back into, Christine and Bob's talk about software bill of materials. What software is out there? What its vulnerabilities are, the scanning of all of that, the threat intelligence that you're going to apply against it. It really becomes, just this whole integrated architecture that has to be thought through from ground zero. And, there's plenty of tools out there, and companies are, moving new products day in and day out that help with that. But the problem is there's a piece here, there's a piece here, and stitching it all together from a CIO standpoint or a CISO standpoint is the challenge. And there's a lot of hype. It's going to become mandated. I mean, you're going to have to move into these environments because, as Christine has said, and as Bob said, trust is now becoming the commodity that will either, make a company great or will sink a company very, very quickly when you violate that trust, particularly with a customer's data. This is what's going to get you in this day and age. And it comes back to, the government regulation part of it too. Government's waking up. Look at the recent executive order. Look at all the things, as Christine said, a lot of these things are common sense that we should have been doing this a long time ago. And if we weren't doing it, shame on us. But they're catching up, and particularly in the areas like automotive, no different than banking, medical, and other areas now. This is going to become a highly regulated area because, as we understand, and as we've said right from the get-go, cars are basically now data devices. They're connected to the network. And to say your data, your personal data is now kept in your car. How many people actually zero out when you rent a car? How many people zero out when you connect your Bluetooth and allow all your contacts to be put onto that automobile? Not many people do. And as I say, I'm hoping the rental car companies get smart and zeroize them out too. But, it's going to become a regulated area. And you are going to have that proof of quality from a software, not just, safety standards. This passes crash test or could do a rollover, or the seat belts are great. It's almost going to be important is what is in that car from a software standpoint. How are you managing vulnerabilities? How are you doing all these types of things? And the industry is going to, if they need to lead this way, because if you don't lead, the government is going to lead you. And so, because you're running on their roads, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's it's just an imperative that we're going to have to consider the cybersecurity aspects of you know, an automobile as critical, because otherwise it's going to get regulated, and it will get regulated. And so we're going to have to pool together as an industry. And again, this industry is not just car manufacturers, it's everything that's going into that car, and the number of OEMs that are producing parts that go into an automobile that now rely on that software is really expanding. And so we're going to have to partner together. We're going to have to figure out, you know, how we're going to hold ourselves accountable and be able to demonstrate that. So, and it gets back to trust.
Well, and the other aspect of that is that you don't just get a part and you sever the relationship, because that part has software. It's going to need to be maintained. And so now you have an enduring relationship you need to manage.
I love the idea of architecting trust into the entire ecosystem, into the entire process. That's going to be so important. And especially as we start looking, certainly at Area X.0, as we start looking at testing fully autonomous vehicles in a live city infrastructure. I mean, that level of trust just becomes palpable. I mean, you know, to have a 2,000-pound piece of metal piloting itself around when there are others in the vicinity, you really need to stop and think about, do I trust everything that's gone into this vehicle and into the communication as well? So before we wrap, I've noticed that there's some audience questions. So I just want to maybe ask one question before we get the hook here. So, so actually, this is an interesting. What is your take on IoT device communication? So inter-device and with people and with the internet and verifiable credentials. So they reference, this individual referenced the W3C standard as an authentication model. So I'm not sure, Bob or Christine or Admiral, which one?
Well, I was going to say, the whole area is, you know, fraught with openings into that trust relationship. So, you know, you need signed elements that ensure the integrity, and often you also need that signed element to identify, you know, where it's coming from, so that it's not just an integrity item, but it's also some registered identity that you can place into a role. And so, is that the person that should have been sending me that update? Is that the actuator or sensor that should be sending a signal for an actuator to be enabled? So the idea of a role-based security down in IoT fabric is a huge change in paradigm. It's not a change in approach. I mean, OT, operational technology, you know, the right information from the right source and the control loop, all of that has always had that concept. But now that you have so many sources of information, you need to implement that concept using different sets of tools.
I feel like we've barely, and I know we've barely scraped the surface of this conversation, but I want to thank all of you for making time to join us today to share your insights, your experience, and your expertise in this area. I think that I look forward personally to staying connected to all of you and to seeking your advice as we continue our work at Area X.0, testing autonomous vehicles and various other connected technologies. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You have been an enormously wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
What an incrediable masterclass on cybersecurity. Thank you so much to all of our panelists, to BlackBerry, QNX for all of their support, and to my friend and colleague Susanne, who came to us from Calian Technology with tremendous cybersecurity background. Thank you so much. So much fun.